Hi, students. So sorry I'm not with you today. I am home with a sick child, so I'm sure I'll be back tomorrow. And I'm also sure that you will be wonderful to our guest teacher because you always are. Um, we are continuing with what we left off with on Friday. But first, before we start, just a few notes about the week. Um, The Science Club field trip is filling up quickly, so if you have a permission slip to turn in, you may turn it in to the substitute teacher, and I will have them write the time that you turned it in on the permission slip. And based on if I receive more than we have room for, the people who turned it in the earliest will be the ones who are able to go. Remember, if you need a permission slip, they're in the black bin on top of my bookshelf by the door. And it's the field trip to Space Place in Madison on the UW campus on February 15th. That's a Thursday after school. So if you have interest in that, check it out. The permission slip is both online in the Science Club classroom and it's in the front of the room. So feel free to check that out. So for today, I want to kind of review what we did on Friday just so that it's fresh in your mind. And if you could, go in your binder and find the rubric that we used for scoring the writing on Friday. So here's an example. Here was the first writing that we scored, and you have a paper copy of this rubric. I know it's tiny on the screen, but you have a paper copy of this in your binder. You may want to take it out so that you can read it more closely. What we're going to do today is we're just going to glance back through these writing prompts, and we're going to find some of the highlights in these writings, even though, we laughed at some of them, and some of them clearly were not up to our standards, but there were some really good parts in some of this writing. So we're going to go back through and we're going to find the parts that we think are excellent, and we're going to put that together into one proficient piece of writing that you can use as a sample, because starting with the next lab, you'll be writing an explanation on your own that I will grade. So I want to make absolutely certain that you have a really good sample on this page in your notebook on page 15. So take out this rubric and open your book to page 15. Okay, so when we look at these writing prompts, here's what we have. This one, remember, we kind of are going to throw out because it had a claim that was an answer to the question. So I gave it a 2 for claim, but it was missing everything else. So we'll move on to the next one. This one, we're not going to pause at for very long because really the only thing that they had was the no as their claim, but the rest of this wasn't really useful for anything. When we pause at the next writing prompt, there still isn't anything that we can really grab hold of that's better. So this really got a similar score to the first two. But then when we look at the third, there's something really bright in the third piece of writing, and it's their claim. Here where they say fat and soap are the same substance, I'm going to go ahead and highlight that, and I'll use the yellow highlighter for claim. But when they say fat and soap are not the same substance, that's an excellent claim. So I would definitely give that claim a 3 on the rubric because it answers the question. It's clear and concise. I don't need to know what the question is to know what their claim is. So I think this is an excellent claim. The rest of their writing doesn't really match up with anything on the rubric, so we're not going to use that. But I want to hang on to this claim because this is a good sample for me to use in my writing. Then when we look at the next piece of writing, their claim is weak, but their evidence in the middle part of their writing is excellent. So they have, this use of the word because clues me in that they're going to start including evidence. And they have fat dissolved in the oil. So that's one piece of really good evidence because that's true. The fat was soluble in the oil and the soap was semi-soluble in water. So this is really good evidence. And it actually comes from the data table up above on page 15. So this is the first time in any of the writing that I've actually seen usable evidence. So then for the reasoning, I think they're intending this to be their reasoning. They can't be the same if they don't dissolve in the same stuff. That's totally true. So that's good reasoning. Two things can't be the same if they don't dissolve in the same stuff, but they're missing some information. I also have a little bit of an issue with this word stuff, because now at this point in the year we have a much better vocabulary word for stuff, and we could even stretch our legs and use some of those really cool vocabulary words we used on Thursday, like solvent, which we know is whatever something dissolves into. So there are some bright spots in this piece of writing. I would probably give them a 2 for their claim, but then for their evidence, I would definitely give them a 3. And then if we look down at their reasoning, that again, I would give them a 2, not because it's bad, just because they're missing some information. So the other thing I want to draw your attention to when you're writing is that when you reason, you should always include a scientific principle. And if we look back at our scientific principles list, your list in your binder, you only have 1. So you want to try to use this in your reasoning when you're writing. But you don't have to write out the whole thing. You just have to capture the idea of the scientific principle to explain what you're saying. So this is a really good place to start. So remember, the things that you need in order to start writing for today's class are the following. We're going to actually write in colored pencil because we're going to do what I usually do, where we color code our claim, our evidence, and our reasoning. And you're actually going to write this on page 15. So page 15 isn't graded. It's just going to be a sample writing that we're going to do together. I want you to write what I write. So you may not even need a pencil for this writing, but you may choose to use it if you like, because I will write my transitions and some of the extra things I use in pencil. So if you're missing any of these things, or if you didn't get them when you came in, I'll have the sub pause the video. At this point, the sub will click pause and you can go get what you need. Okay, so continuing on, I would like you to have in front of you your little copy of the rubric from your binder. If you don't have a copy, there are some extras on the front table that the substitute teacher can give you one. And then also, I want you to be turned to page 15 in your book, because we're going to write in this box. Now, this box is big, but because we're writing an explanation and we want it to be really good, we're going to use all the space. So don't write too large. And if you do end up writing large, maybe just put a sheet of loose leaf paper or something into your binder. I know around page 15 there aren't too many extra places to extend your writing. Okay, so I'm going to write in different colors, and I'm going to start with my claim, and I'm going to think all the way back to that piece of writing that we looked at that had the excellent claim. Because if you remember, this piece of writing had an excellent claim. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this claim. So like I said, I'm going to color code my writing. So I think for my claim, I think what I usually use is red. So I'll get my red pen ready. You can use whatever color you choose. And also, if you want, you can use a key on your page somewhere. I probably won't include a key, but you can include a key that reminds you what your claim, evidence, and reasoning are, what colors you used. So I'm just going to answer the question by saying fat and soap are not the same substance. Okay, go ahead and write that on your page. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to include a transition word. And my favorite transition word between my claim and my evidence is really simple. I'm just going to use because. And you may have noticed in some of our sample writings that students used because as well. Their evidence wasn't always good, but that's a great transition word to use. So next I'm going to lead into my evidence. And remember, we had a writing sample that had really good evidence. So when I look back, this writing sample had, in green, really good evidence. It said that fat dissolved in the oil and soap dissolved in the water. The only thing I don't like about this evidence is it doesn't really say that the fat dissolved in the oil but not the water, and the soap dissolved in the water but not the oil. So I don't think it really captures that they were different because they dissolved in different things. So in my answer, I'm just going to add a little bit, and I'm going to try to use some vocabulary words to strengthen my writing that we learned on Thursday in that sort of matching and fill in the blank sheet. So back to my writing. I think for evidence I usually use blue, so I'll get my blue pen ready. Remember, your colors don't have to match mine, but I'm just going to pick up right where I left off. And I'm going to say fat and soap are not the same substance because they have, oops, I want that to be blue, so I'm going to get going with blue. Because they have different solubilities. Then I'm going to add on with another sentence. I'll say fat is soluble in oil but not water, and soap is soluble in water but not oil. Okay, I'm just going to read that back to myself to make sure it makes sense. Fat and soap are not the same substance because they have different solubilities. Fat is soluble in oil but not water, and soap is soluble in water but not oil. Okay, fantastic. So I got my evidence done. I think it looks good. Remember, you're supposed to have 3 pieces of evidence, but for this lab, we really only did 1 test, so I'm using all the evidence I have, and that's going to be good enough. That's going to be good enough for me to give you a 3 or a 4 in your evidence, in your writing, and it's going to have to be good enough for you. So don't, be too hard on yourself to have extra evidence if it's not available. So make sure you have this written on your page. Now we're getting into the tricky part, and the reasoning is always the tricky part. So I'm just going to write for you what I would write for reasoning, and remember that this is a sample. So a lot of our writing is going to look like this. So if you're confused on your reasoning for another writing sample, turn back to this page and feel free to borrow from mine. Don't copy, use your own words, update it to match the prompt that you're writing for, but feel free to borrow from me. Okay, so I'm going to switch to green because I usually write my reasoning in green so we can tell the different parts. But then I'm going to add my reasoning. So what I really want to try to capture in my reasoning is that fat and soap are different because their solubility is different, and solubility is a property of matter. And if different kinds of matter have different properties, they can't be the same thing because properties are what makes matter different. So I'm going to add solubility is a property of matter, and if fat and soap have unique properties, they cannot be the same type of matter. And I think that sounds pretty good. I'm not sure about my reasoning, so I may want to read it over and edit a little bit. But as far as a sample,